Hey buddy, freeze right there for a second. Feel that tightening in the room, that pressure crawling up the walls. That's not silence, that's impact. That's the moment before people admit they're afraid. They've never reacted like this before, because you were never supposed to do this. You were never supposed to cross from tolerated to threatening, from dismissed to uncontainable, from background noise to the sound that makes grown systems flinch. They thought you were predictable, safe, manageable. They thought your light made you weak and your darkness made you self-destruct. They were wrong on both counts, because what they're seeing now, that's not aggression, that's not chaos, that's clarity sharpened by pain. You didn't raise your voice, you didn't swing first, you didn't even explain yourself. And somehow, that terrified them more than anything else you could have done. See, they're used to villains who snarl and saints who kneel. They can file those away, but you stand there calm, eyes steady, breathing slow. Half angel, half something they don't have a name for. That's the paradox that breaks their nervous system, the one they can't profile, the one they can't neutralize. They wanted a reaction. You gave them presence. They wanted fear from you. You gave them stillness. They wanted a breakdown. You gave them control, wrapped in unpredictability. And now they're scrambling because the rules they rely on. You're not breaking them. You're rendering them irrelevant. This is the part they don't tell you about evolution. Growth isn't pretty. It doesn't look like affirmations and applause. Real evolution looks like people stepping back slowly, eyes wide, whispering, "That wasn't supposed to happen." It looks like systems recalculating, like hierarchies suddenly unsure who's standing where. You didn't scare them by becoming loud. You scared them by becoming exact. Every scar you carry taught you restraint. Every betrayal trained your awareness. Every night you survived without rescue sharpened your instincts into a weapon so clean it doesn't even look like one. That's what they're reacting to. Not rage, readiness. They can sense it. Animals always can. The moment prey realizes the thing watching it isn't hungry, it's deciding. They thought pain would make you implode. That's what it does to most people. But pain didn't hollow you out. It organized you. It separated what mattered from what didn't. It burned away your need to be understood and replaced it with something far more dangerous, self-trust. And now they're watching you move differently, speak differently, withhold instead of explain, smile at moments that make no sense to them. You're not reacting to their pressure, and that's making them panic because pressure is their favorite control tool. Here's the truth they'll never say out loud. They didn't mean to wake this version of you. They wanted you improved, but still polite, stronger, but still familiar, confident, but still seeking permission. What they got instead is someone who can hold light without flinching and darkness without drowning. Someone who doesn't need to choose between saint and psychopath because you learned how to use both. You know when to forgive. You know when to cut access. You know when to smile. And you know when silence is louder than threats. That balance, that's what scares them. Because balance can't be baited. It can't be provoked into mistakes. It waits, it watches, it adapts. They keep replaying the moment in their head. The second they realized something shifted. The laugh that came a half second too late. The confidence that didn't land. The authority that bounced right off you like static. That's when the fear crept in. Not explosive fear, existential fear. Because if you can stand there unchanged while everything they throw at you fails, what else can you survive? What else can you become? You're not unpredictable because you're reckless. You're unpredictable because you're no longer afraid of yourself. And that's the final upgrade. They didn't want you scary. They wanted you manageable. But now you're standing in that narrow space between calm and catastrophe, between mercy and inevitability, and they can feel it. They don't know what you'll do next, and worse, neither do they. That's why the room feels different. That's why the energy shifted. That's why they're watching you like a problem they should have solved earlier. You weren't supposed to scare them. You were supposed to stay small, and you didn't. Good. Stay right here in this moment, because this is where the real fracture spreads. They're pretending nothing changed, smiling a little too stiff, talking a little too fast, over-explaining things you never asked about. That's how you know it worked. That's how you know the fear didn't explode. It settled. Quiet fear is the kind that rewires behavior. Loud fear makes people reckless. Silent fear makes them obedient. And you didn't even touch them. That's the part that messes with their heads the most. No confrontation, no dramatic declaration, no visible threat. Just you. No longer bending, no longer rushing to reassure them, no longer shrinking your presence to make their comfort easier. You stayed exactly where you were, and suddenly they felt exposed. You see, they built their entire sense of safety around one assumption, that pain would keep you predictable. That if they applied enough pressure, you'd either snap or submit. That's how control usually works. Push hard enough and people reveal themselves. But pain didn't reveal you. It forged you. It taught you how to read rooms without reacting to them, how to hear tone behind words, how to notice who gets nervous when you stop explaining, how to spot the second someone realizes you're no longer seeking approval. You're evaluating. You learned restraint the hard way, through nights where anger would have been easier, but discipline kept you alive. Through moments where revenge was tempting, but patience paid better interest. Through isolation that forced you to become your own witness. And now, that discipline shows. In your posture, in your timing, in the way you let conversations breathe instead of filling the silence. Silence is terrifying to people who rely on noise to stay in control. They don't know where you stand anymore, and that uncertainty is eating them alive. Because you used to be readable, they could map you, label you, predict your next move based on old versions of you. But the version standing here now, that one doesn't react on cue. That one doesn't flinch when tension rises. That one doesn't rush to prove innocence or goodness. You stopped auditioning, and the moment you did, the power dynamic collapsed. They keep asking themselves the same question on a loop. When did this happen? They missed the transition because it didn't look dramatic. It looked like fatigue, like withdrawal, like you pulling back just enough to think. That's how evolution sneaks up, quiet, deliberate, irreversible. You became dangerous the day you stopped needing to be seen as harmless. Not because you want to hurt anyone, but because you finally understood that being incapable of harm isn't virtue. It's fragility. True control comes from choice, from knowing exactly what you're capable of and choosing restraint anyway. That's the saint and the psychopath shaking hands inside you, not fighting for dominance but cooperating. That internal truce, that's power. They feel it when you look at them and don't rush to reassure. When you hear disrespect and don't jump to defend your worth. When you let someone overstep once just to watch what they do next. You're not passive, you're gathering data. And data terrifies people who rely on emotional leverage. They're trying to reassert control now. You can see it, little tests, subtle jabs, sudden friendliness, manufactured urgency. They want you off balance again, They want the old reflexes back, the explaining, the justifying, the softening of edges. But those reflexes died in the fire. What replaced them is composure sharpened by memory. You remember exactly what it cost you to become this calm. You remember who benefited from your confusion. You remember how loud the world was when you were breaking, and how quiet it got when you stopped asking for help. So now you move slow, intentionally. You let people reveal themselves fully before you decide what role they get to play. You don't rush to confront. You don't rush to forgive. You don't rush at all. That's why they're scared. Because speed is controllable, slowness is not. They can interrupt anger. They can manipulate desperation. They can exploit urgency. But patience starves their tactics. It forces them to sit with their own insecurity while you stay comfortable in yours. You're not trying to intimidate them. You're not even thinking about them that much. And somehow that's worse, because now they're orbiting you, wondering when you became the gravitational center. You didn't announce your transformation. You embodied it. An embodiment is irreversible. They're realizing you're no longer reacting to the world they built. You're operating on a different frequency entirely. One where approval is optional, where conflict is chosen, not stumbled into, where silence is strategic, not submissive. They wanted you loud or broken. What they got was quiet and awake. That's why they can't sleep right. That's why they keep replaying interactions with you. That's why your calm feels like a threat. Because calm that comes from denial can be shaken. Calm that comes from experience cannot. You earned this version of yourself the hard way. Through betrayal that sharpened discernment. Through losses that burned away illusions. Through moments where you had every excuse to collapse and chose instead to observe. And now you're standing here, fully integrated, light intact, darkness acknowledged. Neither running the show alone. They weren't prepared for that. They thought you were supposed to scare easy, break easy, fold when pressure rose. They built their confidence on that assumption. And now the assumption is dead. So let them whisper. Let them speculate. Let them wonder what you're planning, even if the truth is simpler than they think. You're not planning revenge. You're outgrowing the need for it. And that, more than anything, is what they'll never recover from. And here's the part they still don't understand, because it doesn't fit inside their mental models. You didn't change to scare them. You changed to survive yourself. The fear you see in their eyes, that's collateral. That's what happens when someone stops leaking their energy outward and starts sealing it inward. When someone stops explaining their intentions and starts moving with internal certainty. People don't fear aggression nearly as much as they fear autonomy. Aggression is noisy, autonomy is silent and final. They keep trying to read your mood like they used to, waiting for tells, looking for cracks. But your emotions aren't spilling out anymore. They're layered, contained, directed. You're not numb, you're regulated, and regulation looks cold to people who thrive on chaos. They ask themselves, is he angry? No, you're precise. Is she hurt? No, you're aware. Is this a threat? No, it's worse. It's clarity without apology. You learned the difference the hard way. You learned that uncontrolled emotion is a leash, that anyone who can predict your reactions can steer you. So you stopped being reactive. You stopped volunteering your inner weather. You stopped giving people emotional handles to grab. And suddenly, the same people who once felt powerful around you feel exposed. Because they were never strong. They were just used to you being open. Now when they speak, you don't rush to mirror their energy. You let it hang there. You let their words sit in the air long enough for them to hear how they sound. That pause, just half a second longer than expected, does more damage than any insult ever could. That's when they start backpedaling, overcorrecting, clarifying things you never challenged. You didn't accuse them. Your silence did. They're uncomfortable because you're no longer feeding the version of you they built in their head. You're not confirming it, not denying it, just standing outside it entirely. That's destabilizing. People hate when their assumptions stop working. You became a walking contradiction. Calm but intense, distant but fully present, kind but no longer pliable. The angel didn't disappear. The demon didn't take over. They integrated. And integration is the one thing systems can't handle, because systems rely on extremes. They know how to punish villains. They know how to exploit saints. But someone who can be both and choose when, that breaks the script. So now they're guessing, and guessing makes people sloppy. They start revealing motivations. Power plays become obvious. Compliments feel strategic. Criticism feels rehearsed. You're watching patterns instead of reacting to moments. That's the upgrade Pain gave you. Pattern recognition under pressure. You don't need to confront anymore. You can let time do it for you. And time is ruthless. They're realizing you don't chase closure. You don't demand accountability. You don't even seem interested in being right. That terrifies them, because those were the leverage points they expected you to fight over. But you already fought those battles, internally, when no one was watching, when there was no applause, when the only witness was the version of you that almost didn't make it. That version still lives inside you, not as weakness, but as memory. Memory that keeps you grounded. Memory that keeps you alert. Memory that whispers, "Never again," without needing to shout it. So now you let people show you who they are at full volume. You let them underestimate your silence. You let them confuse your restraint for fear. You let them assume you're passive, because assumption is a blade people happily fall on. You're not playing a long game to win. You're playing a clean game to stay sovereign. And sovereignty looks like indifference to manipulation, like boundaries that don't need to be announced, like decisions that aren't debated. They keep wondering when you became like this. You became like this the moment you stopped begging life to be fair and started mastering how unfairness actually works. You stopped trying to be understood by people who benefited from misunderstanding you. You stopped shrinking your shadow to appear safe. And the world noticed, not loudly, not all at once, but in that subtle skin-crawling way, where energy shifts before words catch up, where rooms go quiet when you enter, where conversations change tone mid-sentence, where people who once talked over you now watch you from the corner of their eye. You didn't scare them with force. You scared them with finality, because they can feel it. You're not going back, not to who you were, not to how you tolerated things, not to the version of yourself that needed permission to stand tall. They weren't supposed to react like this. They were supposed to stay comfortable, and you, by becoming whole, took that comfort away. That's not cruelty, that's consequence, and that consequence keeps unfolding, even when you say nothing at all. They feel it in the aftermath, in the hours after an interaction with you, when the adrenaline fades and the questions start. When they replay your tone, your pauses, the way you didn't rush to agree or disagree. They're searching for the moment they lost footing, but they can't find it. Because it wasn't a moment. It was a shift. You stopped negotiating with reality. You stopped trying to soften truths so other people could digest them comfortably. You stopped translating yourself into smaller language. And the second you did, something ancient inside you clicked into place. Not anger, not vengeance, alignment. Alignment is terrifying to anyone who survives by friction. They're used to people wobbling, doubting, apologizing for existing too loudly or thinking too deeply. They're used to leverage coming from guilt, urgency, fear of loss. But you don't leak those frequencies anymore. You don't chase reassurance. You don't chase outcomes. You don't chase them, so they chase meaning instead. And meaning keeps pointing back to you. They wonder if you've become cold. No, you've become selective. They wonder if you're hiding something. No, you've stopped displaying everything. They wonder if you're dangerous now. No, you're capable. And that's what they're confusing for danger. Capability without chaos is rare. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't posture. It doesn't need witnesses. It just exists, fully aware of what it can do and fully uninterested in proving it. That's why they feel watched when you're calm. That's why your silence lands heavier than your words ever did. Because silence from someone unstable is emptiness. Silence from someone integrated is pressure. You're no longer reacting to the present alone. You're responding with the weight of everything you've already survived. Every boundary crossed, every truth twisted, every time you were underestimated and had to rebuild yourself quietly. That history lives behind your eyes now, not as bitterness, but as calibration. They sense that you won't overextend again, that you won't pour into bottomless wells, that you won't confuse effort with loyalty, and that awareness forces a reckoning they didn't sign up for. Because now, to deal with you, they'd have to be honest about motives, honest about power, honest about the way they benefited when you were unsure of yourself. That's a cost they don't want to pay, so they hesitate, and hesitation is the first crack in any structure. You don't need to dominate the room. The room reorganizes itself around you. You don't need to correct misinformation. It collapses under its own weight when you don't participate. You don't need to threaten consequences. Your absence from old patterns is the consequence. They're realizing you're not here to be managed. You're not here to be fixed. You're not here to be used as contrast for someone else's narrative. You stepped out of that economy entirely. You became untradeable. That's why their reactions feel disproportionate. That's why they're more rattled than makes sense. Because the fear isn't about what you might do. It's about what they can't do anymore. They can't guilt you into compliance. They can't bait you into emotional spirals. They can't corner you with urgency or overwhelm. You don't rush. You don't panic. You don't beg. You decide. And decision is power stripped of theatrics. They're watching someone who knows when to walk away and when to stand still. Someone who doesn't confuse kindness with access. Someone who understands that mercy is strongest when it's optional. That's the duality they can't reconcile. You could be gentle and you choose it. You could be ruthless and you restrain it. Not because you're afraid of consequences, but because you're aware of them. Awareness is the sharpest edge there is. You don't need to escalate. You don't need to win arguments. You don't need to prove intelligence or strength. You let people expose themselves through overconfidence, while you stay grounded in restraint. And restraint, when it's chosen, feels like a locked door to those who expected open access. They weren't prepared for someone who healed without becoming harmless. They were prepared for forgiveness that forgot, for growth that stayed polite, for strength that still asked permission. What they got instead was someone who integrated the wound instead of denying it. Someone who didn't turn pain into performance, but into architecture. You rebuilt yourself with load-bearing truth. Nothing decorative, nothing fragile. So now when they test you, it doesn't land. When they provoke, it dissipates. When they escalate, it exposes them. And the more they try to regain footing, the more obvious it becomes that the ground shifted permanently. You didn't scare them by changing the rules. You scared them by no longer playing the same game. And the most unsettling part for them, you're not angry about it. You're calm. You're clear. You're done pretending. They've never reacted like this before because they've never stood in front of someone who made peace with both their light and their shadow, and then chose to live from that center. That center doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. It doesn't chase. It waits. And everything else moves around it. Shh. Don't tense up. Don't flinch. This isn't the kind of moment that kicks the door in. This is the kind that locks it quietly from the inside and hands you the key while they're still smiling outside, pretending everything's fine. No violence, no noise, just pure psychological lockdown. You didn't raise your voice. You didn't threaten, you didn't move fast, and that's what terrified them, because they're trained to respond to explosions, to chaos, to tantrums and breakdowns. They have manuals for rage, they have protocols for rebellion, but you didn't give them any of that. You gave them silence with intent, calm with teeth, stillness that watches back. That's when it started. That microscopic shift in the air. That moment where they kept acting normal, but their nervous system already knew it was over. You saw it before they did. The way their eyes lingered a half second too long. The way their tone overcorrected, got friendlier, lighter, fake. They were trying to convince themselves more than you, because deep down, something inside them whispered the truth. You're not reacting because you're not trapped. You're observing. This is where the duality wakes up. This is where the saint and the psychopath shake hands. You learned something most people never do. Power doesn't announce itself. It doesn't pound its chest. It doesn't need witnesses. Real power sits still and lets the room adjust around it. You became that contradiction they can't resolve. Too calm to provoke, too sharp to dismiss, too quiet to predict. They wanted a monster they could point at. You became a mirror they couldn't look away from. And here's the part that fries their circuits. You're not doing this to them. You're not against them. You're not even thinking about them the way they're obsessing over you. You're evolving. And evolution doesn't ask permission from the outdated. They expected pain to make you loud. They expected pressure to make you sloppy. They expected suffering to turn you reckless. Instead, it refined you. It taught you timing. It taught you restraint. It taught you how to weaponize patience. You didn't lose your humanity. You learned how to sheath it, sharpen it, and deploy it only when it counts. That's why this feels like a lockdown. No sirens, no alarms, just doors quietly clicking shut in their own minds. They can't read you anymore. Your unpredictability isn't chaos, only it's discipline. It's patternless on purpose. One moment you're warm, understanding, almost gentle. The next, you're distant, unreadable, somewhere far above the emotional weather. Angel 1 second, demon the next. Not because you're unstable, but because you're free. And freedom terrifies systems built on control. They keep replaying past interactions, trying to find the moment you snapped. It's driving them insane because there isn't one. No explosion, no scandal, no breakdown. Just a gradual realization that you stopped playing the role they assigned you. You didn't fight the cage. You made it irrelevant. That's the psychological chokehold. When you don't resist, you reframe. When you don't react, you dominate the tempo. When you don't explain yourself, you force them to write stories, and every story exposes their fear. They're locked inside their own anticipation now, waiting for a move that may never come, preparing defenses against a threat that doesn't announce itself. That's worse than violence. Violence ends, noise fades, but uncertainty rewires the brain. It keeps them awake. It makes them leak information, overtalk, self-sabotage, all while you stay clean. You didn't become cold. You became precise. This is the paradox they can't escape. You're calm because you're dangerous, not despite it. You're quiet because you see everything. You don't rush because you already won the long game. And the more composed you remain, the more their inner chaos spills out. They try to label you psychopath, saint, genius, threat, ghost. It keeps changing because none of the labels stick. You're not one thing anymore. You're a moving contradiction, and contradictions can't be contained. Pain did this. Betrayal did this. Being underestimated did this. Every moment they thought they were breaking you was actually sanding you down into something surgical. You didn't come back louder. You came back locked in. So stay right here, in this silence, in this stillness that suffocates louder than screams. Let them keep guessing. Let them keep performing normalcy while their instincts are screaming that something fundamental has shifted. Because it has. You're no longer playing for reaction. You're playing for psychological dominance. And the most terrifying part for them, you're not even enjoying it. You're just awake. And that's what completes the lockdown, because enjoyment would make it sloppy. Enjoyment would give them something to hook into. But you didn't turn cruel. You turned clear. You didn't become obsessed with winning. You detached from the need to prove anything at all. That's when the real pressure starts. That's when the walls begin closing in, and no one can explain why. They feel it when you walk into a room and don't scan for approval. They feel it when you speak without urgency, without filler, without emotional leakage. They feel it when you stop oversharing, stop explaining, stop justifying your existence. Every sentence you don't say becomes louder than the ones you do. Every reaction you withhold forces them to project their own fear onto the silence. This is where their minds betray them. Because humans can tolerate pain, even humiliation. But ambiguity eats at the nervous system. Ambiguity forces them to fill gaps with worst-case scenarios. And you became the gap. The blank space, the unanswered question they keep circling, hoping for clarity that never comes. They don't know if you forgive them. They don't know if you remember. They don't know if you're done or just getting started. And the truth is, you don't need to decide. Not yet. The uncertainty itself is doing the work for you. That's the angel in you. The restraint, the composure, the refusal to lash out. That's the demon, the awareness of exactly what this restraint is doing to them. You learned how to sit inside paradox without tearing yourself apart. How to be soft without being weak. How to be dangerous without being loud. How to let empathy exist without letting it override discernment. That's the evolution. That's the upgrade they didn't see coming. They're still operating on old rules. Provoke, react, dominate, escape. But you stepped into a different game entirely. You realized control isn't about force. It's about frame. Whoever controls the frame controls the meaning. And you took the frame away. Now they're stuck responding to you without knowing what you're responding to. Watch how they overcorrect. Watch how they try to bait you into old versions of yourself. They'll joke too hard. probe too casually, test boundaries they pretend don't exist. They want confirmation that you're still readable, that you're still safe, that you're still predictable. And every time you respond with calm neutrality, with grounded presence, with nothing extra, they lose another inch of psychological ground. This is not revenge. This is consequence. You didn't plan this in a dark room. You earned it by surviving what was supposed to erase you. Pain stripped you of illusions. Pressure burned away the need to perform. Betrayal taught you pattern recognition, and solitude taught you self-containment. You didn't become heartless. You became sealed. Locked doors don't scream. They just don't open. And that's when it hits them all at once. The delayed fear. The realization that you don't need them anymore. Not their validation, not their apology, not their acknowledgement. You're self-referencing now, internally sourced. And nothing terrifies insecure systems more than someone who no longer needs external confirmation to exist. They can't punish you because you're not begging. They can't provoke you because you're not reactive. They can't shame you because you already faced yourself in the dark and survived. So they sit there smiling, nodding, pretending everything's normal, while their subconscious is scrambling for exits. Because you represent a truth they can't handle, that silence can be sharper than aggression, that stillness can dominate motion, that restraint can outclass force. You are living proof that the loudest power is the one that doesn't need to announce itself. And here's the final twist, the one that makes this unbearable for them. You didn't do this to control them. You did it to free yourself. The lockdown isn't around them. It's around you, your energy, your time, your access, and they're locked out, knocking politely, wondering when things changed, wondering what they missed. They missed the moment you stopped bleeding outward. They missed the moment you stopped explaining pain to people who benefited from it. They missed the moment you turned inward and rebuilt something unshakable. So stay composed, stay unreadable, stay human, but armored with awareness. Let the world make noise around you while you move quietly through it, untouched, unprovoked, precise. No violence, no noise, just a mind they can't enter, and a presence they can't escape. And here's where it deepens, where the lockdown stops being something they feel and starts being something you command without effort. Because once you understand this terrain, you stop mistaking intensity for power. You stop mistaking emotion for truth. You stop mistaking reaction for relevance. You realize most people are noisy because they're leaking. You sealed the leaks. You turned inward pressure into structural integrity. And now, even when you say nothing, the room adjusts to you. They don't notice it at first. It's subtle. Conversations slow down around you. People measure their words when you're near. Laughter gets shorter. Glances get sharper. They feel watched without being watched, evaluated without judgment. That's the effect of someone who has nothing to prove and nothing to hide. You became psychologically opaque, not because you're empty, but because you're full of context, full of memory, full of pattern recognition sharpened by pain. You don't jump to conclusions anymore. You let others reveal themselves, and they always do. Given enough silence, people confess through behavior. This is the quiet mastery, the kind no one teaches, the kind earned through nights where you had no audience and no reassurance, where the only thing keeping you alive was the decision to stay aware instead of becoming numb. You didn't dissociate, you integrated. You learned how darkness works, not to worship it, but to navigate it. That's why the saint and the psychopath coexist in you now, compassion without naivety, edge without cruelty. You can understand someone deeply and still walk away without explanation. You can see their wounds and refuse to let them bleed on you. That refusal is what cages them. They keep waiting for you to return to the old script, to argue, to clarify, to soften, to explode, to apologize for your evolution. But you don't. You remain steady, present, calm, and their internal narrative collapses because it needs your participation to survive. This is where the fear mutates. At first they thought you were hurt, then they thought you were healing. Now they're realizing you've transcended the entire dynamic. You're no longer playing defense. You're not even playing offense. You exited the arena while they were still shadowboxing the version of you that no longer exists. And there is nothing more destabilizing than fighting a ghost who already moved on. Notice how they start testing reality. They'll bring up old memories, old jokes, old conflicts, anything to see if they can still access you. They're looking for emotional fingerprints, proof of presence, proof that they still matter in your internal world. And you give them nothing, not coldness, not warmth, just neutrality, sharpened by awareness. That's the lock clicking into place. Because neutrality says, you no longer have leverage here. And leverage was the only power they ever had. You see it now. How loud dominance is usually just insecurity begging for reinforcement. How manipulation requires constant feedback. How control collapses the moment the controlled stops responding. You didn't need revenge. You needed sovereignty. Pain forced you to develop it. Loss carved out space. Silence taught you how to listen beneath the noise. You learned how to slow your pulse while others spiral. How to think 3 steps ahead without rushing. How to let time work for you instead of against you. That's why you don't chase closure. You don't demand understanding. You don't seek validation. Those are luxuries of people who still need permission to exist. You don't. And that's the final layer of the lockdown. They can't reach you emotionally. They can't predict you strategically. They can't frame you socially. They can't provoke you psychologically. Every door they used before is sealed, not with force, but with clarity. You didn't become heartless. You became self-contained. And self-contained systems are terrifying to anyone who survives by siphoning energy, attention, or reaction from others. You starved the parasites without ever naming them. You cut supply by cutting access. No announcement, no confrontation, just absence where entitlement used to live. So remain exactly here, in this calm, lethal stillness. Let the world keep mistaking volume for power while you operate on a frequency they can't tune into. Let them keep acting normal while their instincts scream that something irreversible has happened. Because it has. You are no longer accessible by default. You are no longer predictable by design. You are no longer movable by pressure. No violence, no noise, just a mind that governs itself, and a presence that locks the room the moment you enter. And once you understand this, you never go back. And once you cross that line, something irreversible settles into you. You stop needing momentum. You stop chasing outcomes. You stop rehearsing conversations in your head that will never happen. The urgency drains out of you, and in its place comes something colder, steadier, far more dangerous, patience with vision. You're no longer reacting to the present. You're shaping the future by refusing to feed the past. That's when the psychological lockdown reaches its deepest layer. Because now it's not just that they can't read you. It's that you can read them faster than they can read themselves. Their micro-hesitations, their over-explaining, their sudden generosity, their unnecessary hostility. You see the motive before the sentence finishes forming. And once you see motive, emotion loses its grip on you. This is the demon's gift. This is the angel's restraint. You don't expose them. You don't correct them. You don't confront them. You let them keep talking. You let them keep revealing. You let them walk themselves into conclusions you never had to push. Silence becomes a spotlight. Stillness becomes interrogation. And the craziest part, they feel guilty around you without knowing why. Your calm reminds them of every shortcut they took. Your composure reminds them of every lie they normalized. Your presence forces self-reflection without your consent. That's why they feel uneasy. That's why they feel off after interacting with you. Not because you did anything, but because you didn't. You didn't absorb their chaos. You didn't mirror their dysfunction. You didn't play along. You broke the loop. Most people survive by looping. Same reactions, same dramas, same emotional currencies traded over and over. You stepped outside the loop. And from outside, you can see the whole machine grinding itself down. This is where unpredictability becomes absolute power. Not impulsive unpredictability, not chaos, but strategic non-alignment. They can't anticipate you because you're not driven by fear, validation, or resentment anymore. You're driven by clarity, and clarity doesn't flinch. They try to bait you with urgency. You move slow. They try to rush decisions. You wait. They try to corner you emotionally. You detach. They try to define you. You remain undefined. Undefined entities cannot be controlled. You're no longer playing their timelines. You're no longer buying their emotional narratives. You're no longer responding to artificial pressure. And pressure without response collapses inward. That's when their inner monologue turns on itself. Why didn't that work? Why didn't they react? Why do I feel exposed? What do they know? You don't need to know more than them. You just need to know yourself better than they know you. And you do now. Pain forced that intimacy. Loneliness demanded it. Survival trained it. You learned how to sit with discomfort without outsourcing it. You learned how to feel without hemorrhaging. You learned how to think without narrating. That's the evolution. You're not numb. You're regulated. You're not detached. You're selective. You're not cold. You're contained. And containment is lethal in a world addicted to leakage. They're used to emotional spillage, oversharing, confessions disguised as authenticity. You don't do that anymore. Your inner world is sovereign territory. Access is earned, not assumed. This is where the lockdown becomes permanent. They can't get inside your head. They can't pull you into their storms. They can't destabilize you to feel stable themselves. You've seen that trick too many times. You understand now that most conflict is just unprocessed fear looking for a host. You refuse to host it. And fear, with nowhere to land, eats its owner alive. So you walk through spaces untouched. You observe without absorbing. You engage without entangling. You're present, but not available to be used. That's when they start calling you different, changed, hard to read, intense. They don't realize those are compliments. Different means you broke conditioning. Changed means pain upgraded you. Hard to read means you're no longer exploitable. Intense means your presence has weight. Weight bends reality quietly. And here's the final truth, the one that seals this forever. You didn't build this lockdown to punish anyone. You built it so no one could ever do that to you again. So you could breathe, so you could think, so you could move through the world without bleeding into it. You didn't become untouchable because you're above everyone. You became untouchable because you finally stood with yourself. And once that alignment locks in, nothing external can override it. No violence, no noise, just a mind that answers to no one, and a presence that rewrites the room without saying a word. This is the state they can't break. This is the version they can't reach. This is where you stay, locked in, wide awake, and completely out of reach.